It's good that you are here, and together we are going to understudy the subject of prayer. So, as you already know, this is Expository 247, and on this platform there is illumination, there is enlightenment, there is enrichment, there is discipleship and training in righteousness. And so we are trusting the Lord that will be faithful stewards and we will not hold back whatsoever that is profitable for you. And we've been on this subject of prayer for a long while. I think we have the 14th episodes now. So we're still going to dig deeper and explore further on this subject of prayer. I hope we can carry you along. So if you have missed any of our episodes, you can just run to our page. This was the 247 page on Facebook. And we have some episodes on YouTube as well. So you can really familiarize yourself. And not only just familiarizing yourself, you really need to sit down with these things and explore further some Bible references. Should you have any questions and comments, you know where to go on our page. We welcome comments, we welcome your questions and anything that needs clarification. And if it was a personal message, you know, there's a personal box for sending a message. We do appreciate it if you are blessed by this, if you will share it among your contacts so that other people will be blessed. So last Sunday in the morning we stopped at the book of James, and there was a lot to start to talk about then. So today I think we want to kick off from there, or if you have something else to say about it.
Well, thank you again for joining us on this knockout series on prayer. It's great to be able to come into wherever you are at the moment, into your household or wherever you're located. And as she has actually said, we are currently on a knockout series on prayer. And what we've actually dealt with in the last episode is how do we drive out this unbelief by the tool of fasting, according to what Jesus talked about in Mark chapter 9. And currently we're looking at the book of James chapter 1 and looking at the insight that the book of James has to give us into knocking out this unbelief. And that's where we actually stopped. And so we're looking at, I think we actually did stop on James chapter 1 verse 15. But before we actually go there, and I think we need to make something quite clear to our viewers. You see, the subject or the notion of unbelief has so many stakeholders. I mean, for example, God is the main stakeholder in unbelief, because Jesus told him in Mark 9, this kind will not go out except by fasting and prayer. And that this kind was talking about was unbelief. So God is very much interested that we don't operate in unbelief, so he doesn't nullify our faith. But one thing we did see from the previous episode is, having gone through 1 Corinthians chapter 7 verse 5, we began to see another stakeholder in the issue of unbelief, and that's the devil. We didn't know that the devil actually was also a very interested party in we walking unbelief. In fact, the book of 1 Peter chapter 5 from verse 7 to 9 also told us about the fact that Satan is very much interested that every Christian should be dragged into unbelief. If you notice what Paul Peter said, you can check the last transmission. Please do check it. Yeah. You will understand that the enemy of our soul is so much more interested in this issue of unbelief. Most Christians think when Satan wants to attack them, he's going to attack them with lots of things. But the Bible tells us in that 1 Peter 5, 7 to 9, that if the devil will attack a Christian, he will do it by trying to drag the Christian into unbelief. So it says resist him, standing in the faith. So please, so you can understand, it's a very important thing that we are talking about. There's so many stakeholders in this thing. So we stop in James chapter 1 verse 15.
Like I said, there's an unfinished business in James chapter.
James 1 15 was where we stopped. And what we stopped at is the insight that the scriptures has to give us in driving out this unbelief. It's an insight we will look at in James chapter 1 verse 15. Now, see what it says. This is where we stop. Now, I think for clarity and understanding, we want to read from verse 13 again, so that those who are joining us can actually understand the backdrop. James 1:13, you can read, please.
Let no man say when he's tempted,
okay,
I am tempted of God.
Now, again, please, we've actually clarified in previous episode that it's temptation, as it were in this case, a temptation to be dragged into unbelief. That's very clear. It's not a temptation, as it were, just to anything. James clarifies in context. It's the temptation to be dragged into unbelief. You can actually listen to our last transmission to get a better picture of that. Go on, please.
For God cannot be tempted with evil.
Okay.
Neither tempted he any man.
Yes, please.
Verse 14.
Yeah.
But every man is tempted when he's drawn away of his own lust.
Okay.
And enticed. Verse 15.
Yes, please.
Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin.
Okay.
And sin, when it is finished, it bringeth forth death.
Well, so thank you for that. What the scripture shows us now is the connection, or you might want to call the procedure, that actually ensues when a man is to be dragged into unbelief, and how we can stop it in its tracks. Well, what it tells us, they said this being tempted in this case, which is the temptation to walk in unbelief, it says it's simply this. It said the enemy has a strategy. And the strategy is that there's a lust, there's a desire, there's an enticement. So it means, as it were, there's an enticement on the Christian. And it says this enticement, which he called lust, it says when it has conceived. This is the word we are going to zero in on. It's about conception. Now, you and I know, I mean, whether in terms of plants or animals or humans, conception only happens when you have the seed going into the egg. So unless the seed penetrates the egg and fertilization happens, you don't have conception. So the problem, as it were, is not just the seed. The problem, as it were, is not just the egg. What actually leads to conception is actually that the egg and the seed have to meet up. So James used this illustration to tell us as Christians how we can stop being dragged into unbelief in its tracks. He said what simply happens is this: as long as the seed does not enter into the egg, there can be no conception. Now, if you watch this, he tells us what that conception is. He says when it is fully conceived, he said it leads to sin. Now, again and again, of course, every time we fall into temptation, it is sin. But let us clarify that the sin in question, we have to read the Bible in context. The sin in question in this place is ultimately the person falls into unbelief. Now, if you want to wonder why, he told us in previous verses, for up to verse 12, he tells us that if any man actually doubts, it's like the wave of the sea tossed to and fro. He said the double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. We've actually clarified this is unbelief. So James is telling us how a man can eventually fall finally into unbelief. Now, if you're wondering, is unbelief then a sin, or what are we talking about? Of course it is. Please do check Hebrews chapter 3. We read this in previous episode where he simply says, to whom was he angry within 40 years? He said, was it not those who have sinned? And then the last verse says, they fell and they could not enter in because of their what? Unbelief. So go and read Hebrews chapter 3. The last few verses did connect sin and unbelief. Again, if you read Romans chapter 14, it tells us that everything that is not of faith, he said it is sin. As long as a man falls into unbelief, the Bible says categorically that is a sin. Now, we tend to categorize sin as big sin, small sin. The Bible says every time we walk in unbelief in the place of prayer, according to the scriptures, it is sin. So what we are trying to say now is, in the context of what James is talking about, is addressing unbelief as a question. And James says, to fall into unbelief is as the same thing as what happens when there's conception. So it means then, the question you want to ask is, how do we stop conception? It's the same analogy that happens in the natural. To stop conception, is it having the seed of the man or the seed of the woman is not the problem. That doesn't automatically lead to conception. Having the seed doesn't lead to conception. There has to be an impregnation. It means the seed of the man has to go into the seed of the woman before you can have that. So what does that mean for you and I in terms of what? Driving out this unbelief. So it simply means then, for the fact that things happen around us, that we can see things, or that we can feel things, or that we can actually hear things, which are the sources of what? Unbelief. That's not a problem. That's not the eggs. You have the seed is there. What leads to the conception is those things, those very things encroaching in and taking root. That's where there's a meeting point. James says you don't fall into that sin of unbelief unless there's a conception. There has to be a meeting point. So for you and I, we engage this word. We go about every day. You pray for one thing in the morning. What you see after the prayer seems to be contrary to what you are praying for. You're believing God for a deliverance. You're believing God for something. You are petitioning the Father for something. And once you finish praying, in the place of prayer, you look outside there and everything seems contradictory. Now, the problem is not what you see, because the seed, just having seed doesn't lead to conception. That's not the problem. Instead, the problem is there is often a meeting point between what you see and how you respond to what you see. And if that meeting point takes place, James says that's the conception, and that's the falling into the sin of unbelief. So it means it all goes back to enduring. Enduring means, can you keep looking at it? Can you keep hearing? Can you keep feeling what is contradictory to what God says about your life? And yet, you're not allowing those things to encroach into your senses. That's what he's talking about. You see, you have to stop the conception. You can look at it, but you cannot take it in. That's what James is saying. That's the way he says we can drive this what? Unbelief out of our life. You can't pray away the cares of this world around you. You cannot pray away the things that are happening. But what you can do is to make sure you stop every conception from from taking place. And that's what he's talking about in this place.
So if you understand that passage well and the illustration, the analogy well, you see that you have a place where you can disrupt and interrupt the process of conception and see that it will not come into germination. So now equipped with all those points in which you can terminate it, just like you cannot stop the bird flying over your head, so you cannot stop the cares of the world.
You can't stop circumstances.
As long as you are in this side of this of eternity, you are going to have your full dose at different times in different variation and variety, as long as you're on this side of eternity. As you cannot stop that, but we have shown the link for you and where you can interrupt. Then it can say you're not going to come into fruition. You're not going to come into fruition. So you have the power here to interrupt with this understanding. And I do hope that you are going to take advantage of that knowledge. The knowledge that the Lord is opening our eyes to in that passage, and interrupt and see that there is no fruition.
Now, thank you for that. Now, the question you're asking, how did we get to this place? Jesus said again in Mark chapter 9, this kind cannot go out except by fasting and by prayer. It would mean then, for somebody not to allow a conception, for somebody not to allow whatever is coming from out there to plant a seed into our senses, it would mean then the person is in charge. It means the person has gotten to a point that it determines what goes in and what isn't going in. And you can see that you cannot stop a conception if everything is allowed to penetrate your soul. It's just not possible. You can't stop it, because as soon as they come, they're encroaching anyway. So it means then this all goes all the way back to what is in Mark 9 and what is in 1 Corinthians 7:5, where it simply says we must get to a point where our senses are kept in subjection. It means we can say, well, you cannot go in. You can't go in. There's no conception going to happen in this place. And that is what James is saying, that we can stop the conception, and we cannot really unless we are taking charge of our senses. And that's what we see in this place. There's a place where the Apostle Paul did say something, and in 1 Corinthians 9, where he says, I myself, I bring my body under subjection, so after I preach the gospel, I will not be a castaway. Well, people think about Paul was talking about the issue of the fact that was going to heaven, he doesn't want to miss heaven. Well, if you read the place in context, he wasn't even talking about heaven anyway. In fact, he related this to an athlete, and he says, you know what athletes do? The reason why they bring their body under subjection, they do that majorly because they're waiting that at the time of the actual event, when the athlete tells his body, I want it to go at a higher speed, I want it to go faster, the body listens. Because why? That particular body has learned to listen to the athlete in the place of training. So the Apostle Paul said, I train my body, I pummel it, I bring it to subjection, so I determine what gets conceived and what doesn't get conceived. I can tell my senses, even though you are looking at it, you cannot take it in. And I think something comes to heart in this particular place. For example, you cannot stop the things that you listen to in this world. I mean, you cannot stop the things that come from TV. Unbelief, so much unbelief comes from the internet, comes from the TV, comes from every means possible. But as they come in, you can't stop them from coming or at you. But what you can stop is saying, no conception is going to happen here. And that's what James is talking about. And if you notice, Jesus said in Mark chapter 4, Jesus said something. He said, be careful. There's a place that be careful what you hear. But also in another place, it says, be careful how you hear. It means, it's simply saying, of course, if you can't stop the thing coming at your hearing faculty, don't forget, we said hearing is one of the means of the sources of unbelief penetrating our lives. You can't stop the hearing from coming, but Jesus said, of course, you can be careful how you hear. It means you can determine how you process it, which means you actually stop the conception from taking place.
You made the side reference about when you were talking about what Paul wrote about that, mending his body, and said it wasn't about heaven. So for the sake of our viewers who might have thought it was heaven, so since it's a side reference, we really need to clarify for them.
Okay, now let's really look at that. Let's look at that, which means that's in 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians. Chapter 9, let's look at that quickly. I made reference to that. And then again, don't forget, we are talking about driving out this unbelief. That's where we are talking, that's what we're all about. And James has brought another insight. James says we can stop the conception. Now you can read 1 Corinthians chapter 9. You can actually take it from, I think a good place to start will be verse 19, please, so that we can get a context. Look at 1 Corinthians 9 from verse 19.
It reads, for though I be free from all men, yet have I made myself servant unto all, that I might gain them all. And unto the Jews that became as a Jew, that I might gain the Jews. To them that are under the law as under the law, that I might gain them that are under the law. to them that are without law as without law, be not without law to God, but under the law to Christ, that might gain them that are without law. So the weak became I as weak, that might gain the weak. I made all things to all men, that might by all means save some. And this I do for gospel's sake, that might be partaker thereof with you.
Okay.
Verse 24. Know ye not that they which wrong...
Now, please, if you take note from verse 19 to 23, in context, what the Apostle Paul was simply saying is, I'm able to adapt myself. It means, he says, I can present the gospel to whatever kind of ethnic group, whatever kind of people. He says, I can, to those who are like Jews, I can actually present the gospel on the basis of speaking from the law of Moses. I can introduce Christ starting from the law of Moses. If those people are people that are what? Jewish in origin. And for those people who have known nothing about the laws of Moses, who have no sense of these ordinances and all this tabernacle, if those people are just Gentiles, which most people, if you're not a Jew, if you're not an Israelite, of course you are in that category. Paul said, I'm able to present the gospel to them who are without the law, like somebody without the law. So Paul said, I'm flexible. I'm able to move from one party to the other and still present the gospel with clarity. Now that is the context. That's why we cannot take the scriptures out of context. So this is the very thing that Paul says he's actually points to do and is able to do. So let's now see what he has to say from verse 24. Don't forget that context now. There's nothing about heaven. There's nothing about going to heaven after he dies. He's talking in context about the fact that I'm able to present the gospel to different categories of people. Paul said I'm able to do that. Now watch this.
Verse 24. Know ye not that they which run in a race run all, but one receiveth the prize. So run that ye may obtain. And every man that striveth for the mastery is temperate in all things. Now
don't forget, the question you're asking, what kind of mastery is he talking about? Now, if not for time, if we are ready from this chapter 9, from verse 1, and I encourage you to go and read it from verse 9, from verse 1, all the way, is in the same context about the fact that he's presenting the gospel to different classes of people. That's the context of chapter 9. There's nothing about heaven in chapter 9. It's about the fact that I can preach the gospel to anyone. And you of course know some people cannot. In our 21st century, some people, their gospel is so streamlined and so narrow that it's only relevant to a particular culture, and that's very common nowadays. Gospels that is so based on culture, ethnic, or location, or social class or gender. If some gospel are gender based, it's not even relevant to some other gender. So Paul says, well, for me, I have a capacity to move in between classes. And see, if you're going to read from verse 1 of chapter 9, this is the audio context. So it's nothing about talking about heaven here. So the mastery is talking about is, well, my capacity to be able to present the gospel to different classes of what? People. Paul said, I'm aware that some people cannot do it. Before you go on, please, I want this to be clearer to our listeners. Is even Peter could not. Peter the apostle struggled in the case of presenting the gospel, to the Gentiles, because he was so entrenched in the Jewish way of doing things. And Paul said, you know what? I have the capacity to do things that Peter could even do. I could preach to the Jews and preach to the Gentiles. And he's telling us that if you want to strive for mastery, if you want to get to that point where you're able to present the gospel to all classes. So the mastery is talking about, it has nothing to do with about going to heaven. You have to read it in context. Now go on, please.
And every man that striveth for the mastery is temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a corruptible crown. But we are incorruptible. Verse 26. I therefore so run, not as uncertainly. So fight I, not as one that beateth the air. But I keep under my body and bring it unto subjection, lest that by any means, when I have preached to others, I myself should be a castaway.
So then you can see what it says. He says, can you see that? After I preach to others, Paul says, well, after I preach, now these are people interpret it to be. People say, well, Paul saying, well, after I preach the gospel to others, I don't want a situation where God will say, even though you preach the gospel to others and they are saved, where you yourself, you will not make it. Even though you are preaching to others, you want to preach to them, actually save them. You yourself would not make it. Well, that would not run in the same line of what he was talking about. Paul said, well, I want to be in a shape. I want to be in a good shape. That if I preach to the gospel to others, I will become irrelevant in accessing other people, or in a way, which is what happens nowadays. Some people, we preach so much to a class of people, and they will become so irrelevant to addressing other class of people. So Paul is simply saying here, I don't want to be disqualified from being what? All things to what? All men. This is the disqualification in chapter 9 of 1 Corinthians is about him being able to be all things to all men. And this is what, like we said, it happens. I mean, it's just human nature where we become so used to some people, to others, and then we just find out we're disqualified, or we are not able to access some other set of what? People. This is what happens in our days and in our times.
Then again, I was thinking, it was talking about the judgment seat of Christ. It's not even about going to heaven, the judgment seat of Christ. So we will all be cast away. Yeah,
you're right. But like, I mean, of course, what we are simply talking about in this case, that's what you said is actually right. But let's look at in this context, because it did simply, if you look at from chapter 10, and of course, you viewers, you know, the scriptures were not written in verses or chapters. It was for the sake of accessibility, or being able to pick those verses easily for our reference. And that's why they put it in chapters and what? And verses. And then if you, like we said, what you've just talked about now from chapter 10, did talk about it more of our brethren. I will not have the issue what? Ignorant. Our fathers were under the what? The cloud. Now, all that he's talking about was, he was simply saying, I've gotten to a point in my Christian journey where I have pummeled my body, I've brought my body in a what? Subjection. So I don't have to listen to what my senses have to tell me to know where to go or what to do. I've become so, you know, I can actually move in a dimension of what God wants me to move in. And you see, one thing for sure is, if we as a Christian are not able to operate in those dimensions, what actually happens, we're able to short circuit our destiny, not even in the by and by, even in the now. I mean, that's why Paul was saying, well, if I don't promote my body and bring it under subjection, even I will not be able to access some men. And you see, when it comes to the judgment seat of Christ, when we're getting the reward for the things we have done in the flesh, there'll be some things that he, as Paul, would not have been able to achieve as he should have achieved if he had not been able, if he had brought his body in a what? Under subjection. So of course, again, we're simply saying it's not about going to heaven. It's deeper than that. It's about destiny. It's about destiny. Well, what's his destiny? Paul had a destiny. A destiny to reach both the Jews and the Gentiles. And Paul said, I know there's a problem. If my senses are the one dictating to me, I will not be able to achieve this. I'll be disqualified from achieving this. And that's the very thing he's talking about. And then this disqualification in achieving this, both in the now and in the hereafter, has implications. But of course, again, we say it's not about going to heaven. To go to heaven, the only requirement that a man needs is to put faith in the Lord Jesus for qualification. The Bible says in Colossians 1 that God has qualified us. It's not that we will be qualified if we spend 20 years in the church or as Christians in ministry. No, God has qualified, who has qualified us to be partakers of inheritance of the saints. Like, our qualification is not of ourselves or what we do or don't do, is of our faith in the finished work of Jesus Christ. If that's the case, it would mean that the qualification that the Apostle Paul is talking about in this case is not that qualification in Colossians 1, 12, 13. It's a different qualification. It's a qualification that makes you to be able to walk in the very destiny that God has called you into. It means if he wants you to preach to the Jews, your body or your senses are not dictating to you to limit you. If he wants to minister to the what? To the Gentiles, your body or your senses are not the one dictating to you. So it means you are available for whatever God wants to do with you. That's what Paul is saying. And hereafter, of course, at the judgment seat of Christ, the Bible says we will give account for the things we have done in what? In the flesh. But that's the judgment seat. That's not about going to heaven. And that's why we need to clarify that. But of course, thank God we have come to this particular verse of the scriptures. Of course, what we see again is our senses again. Our senses, they have the capacity to limit how we operate in our faith. It drives unbelief into what? Our lives. And the Apostle Paul said, how I deal with it is not by declaring more faith. It's not by trying to hear more of the gospel. I do that by what? Bringing my body under what? Subjection. I do things. Now, he didn't tell us what he does or how he does it, but we can look at the insights from other parts of the scriptures, like 1 Corinthians 7:5, like Mark chapter 9, that Jesus talked about how to deal with his unbelief. So we know Paul was incorporated the tool of what? Fasting. And of course, if you take your time out to read places in the scriptures, Paul talked about the things he does as an apostle that actually were signs of an apostle. He said one of the signs he gave was he said fastings often. He said I do that often. I bring my body under subjection. So as Christians, it would mean then we need to drive this unbelief out by being in charge of our senses, by bringing things under subjection.
Yes, initially this verse looked like a side attraction where I just read that the Lord wanted to magnify this and is actually bringing what we are talking about, bringing our body in subjection even to the light.
Yeah.
You know, verses like this that we never even thought about. That we can see that even for you to be effective in thereafter, you need to be effective now. So your destiny, the body that you cannot bring it to subjection now, in which you can formulate it and it can be shaped to fit the purpose of the master, even here. Now, what will you be able to do in the judgment seat of Christ? That means, the body you cannot, that is not in subjection now. The results there at the judgment seat of Christ is like you get the works that get born. Because you have not been able to control, you have not been able to put all the demands that you need to put on your body so that it can be available and do all that the Lord will want you to do. Because if not putting your body into subjection, like Paul was doing, it makes you to do some works that are labors that are going to get bumped. Because you are not going to do anything anyhow. And so we need this subject. What we are discussing is so important for us for now. Even thereafter, like we see Paul, that he was suitable, he can work in different circles, he was able to use all the grace of God, and maybe he was not limited even now. And then thereafter, in the judgment seat of Christ, when we know we are going to get the crown that is incorruptible, but because he knows how to bring his body to subjection, so he's not going to do fruitless labor and works that will get burnt. Most people that will end up with work that get burnt is because of lack of discipline on the body, lack of discipline, so that they're able to build according to the pattern. So they allow the body to go haywire. They allow the senses, the natural sense, to override
to respond
mission.
to everything out there. Sense of hearing, sense of sight, sense of feeling, everything just encourages in and just what impregnates and conception.
And it affects the quality of the work at the judgment seat of Christ, because the body is not in subjection. So we really need to know this subject. We need it to understand this thing. We need it for now, for our destiny now, so that we can fit into wherever the Lord wants us to fit in. Will be a mode we can fit into wherever He wanted us to fit. Just like Paul was able to minister in all of his, in the capacity, in everything, in all the capacity. So be able to fit into whatever He wants us to be. But the body that you're going to stretch into all that is a body that must be in subjection. And then you see, fasting is part of it. Even Paul said, I fast often.
So our fast is often.
He said, he speak in tongues more than those people, more than all of them all. So it takes a lot of discipline. It takes a lot of prayer, just like praying in tongues and fasting. We see it here. This is how to deal with the body. This is how to bring the body into shape. That's the endurance and fitness we talked about on Sunday morning. This is it.
Now, thank you for that. Yeah,
it is it.
Now, thank you for that. Now, as you can see, if Paul said I fast often, but we've said this before. But I like that again, that it's not old covenant fasting.
Yeah.
The Old Testament fasting is a fasting to convince God or to get God's favor. That's not what we are called to do.
Gather points.
No, you don't gather credit points with God. You don't even get much more qualified to go to heaven, because of the more you fast. That is not old, that's not new covenant fasting. The new covenant fasting, as we see, is a means to drive out unbelief. So Paul says, I bring my body under what? Subjection. I dictate to my body. I tell him what to do. Even though I pray a prayer and my body wants to respond based on what I tell my body, you know what we prayed? You can't respond that way. I bring my body under subjection. So this is what we're talking about. New covenant fasting is primarily and fundamentally a channel of driving out unbelief in our lives. And that's what that says. So thank you for bringing us into this particular verse. And then again, quickly, let's go on with what we're talking about in James. So James has actually told us about how to drive this unbelief out. James says simply, we cannot stop what we look at. We cannot stop what we hear outside there. Neither can we stop the things that are coming at our feelings. We can't. We can't stop the seed. The seed will be there. The seed and the eggs are there. But what we can stop is the thing actually penetrating and encroaching in and taking a seat in our hearts. They said we can stop that. They said we have the capacity to stop that. And that's one thing, man.
Yes, and that is what we are doing here, that we are trying to introduce us and let us know how to stop this thing, that it doesn't take root. We don't allow the process to go all through. And that is the avenue of this, what we are sharing on Exposition 247. And in some places in the scripture where it says we're washing of the water by the word, because all these things will come. All those confusion and unbelief, things that all those situations will arise. But because as long as they are on this side of eternity, but you need to come to the place of where you are washing of the water of the word, in which, like what we are doing now, you go into a private study of yourself, go into a place of prayer that it does not settle in you. So when they bring those news to you, it doesn't settle down. We wash it away, because you don't want it to take root and get it implanted and fertilization. So you begin to watch out for points where you are going to be disrupting the process of conception, where unbelief wants to take root and give birth inside of you, and say, no, you are going to use the instrument of God's word, the washing of the water of the word, the feet washing. That's the symbolic, the feet washing by the saints. So the gathering with the saints, looking into the scriptures, praying and fasting, and saying, no, there's no place for you. So we are going to dispel doubt. By faith, we dispel this doubt. It will not settle in us, and so we are going to destruct it.
Now, thank you for that. Now, before we go to other verses, let us highlight one thing. When it comes to this fasting, predominantly, New Covenant fasting is denial. And it's called, you might want to say, intentional denial. Like we read it in 1 Corinthians 7:5. Please check our previous transmission where it talks about the couple coming together to agree to intentionally deny themselves. New Covenant fasting is intentional denial. Why? It means then it's just a way of stopping the conception of every seed of unbelief being planted. For example, if you perceive that watching a particular program or listening to a particular thing on radio or watching it on TV or on the internet or on your social media or YouTube, whatever it is, if these things are constantly coming as trying to feed things into your heart to cause a conception to take place, you have at that point to disrupt the process. And it says what you could do is deny. That's where fasting comes in, because when we talk about fasting, in most cases we end up thinking it's about food. Well, of course it includes food, but it's more than that. It's deeper than that. Now, if you notice in the ministry of Jesus, the reason why there was so much manifestation of the grace and the glory of God in his ministry was he was such a man in the flesh that was actually fully fasted. I mean, for example, you will notice there are times Jesus had to send the crowd away when he was going to minister to Jairus' daughter to raise her from the dead. He asked the father and the mother, and they pushed those people away. Now, that's a disconnection. That's a denial of what comes. I mean, we have to consciously not just try to build up faith in our Christian life. We take conscious steps to deny things that feed what? Unbelief, to disrupt the conception process. And that's what it's saying. Unless we do that, we will be praying, believing God, and at the same time allowing unbelief to take root and be conceived. And as we said before, unbelief type 2 is the type of unbelief that actually mitigates and nullifies what? Faith. So that's what James is saying. He's seeing the whole picture as conception. Let's go quickly to Mark chapter 4 and see more insight into how to drive this unbelief out. So James says, as long as we can disconnect, that thing from taking root in our hearts, then everything will be fine. That's what it's simply saying. Now, Mark chapter 4, we can read from verse 18. And let's see this procedure again of how to drive this unbelief out with the tool of denial and the tool of, that's the tool of fasting. Mark chapter 4 from verse 18, please. Now, let's take that slowly and see another insight in the scriptures to driving out this unbelief.
Okay, Mark 4:18.
Yes.
Reads.
Yeah.
And these are they which are sown among thorns.
Well, now, yeah, I mean, so that we can get a summary of the backdrop, it is Jesus spoke the parable of the sower who was sowing the seed. And then one thing you will notice from verse 14, and we just don't want to, go line by line so that we can bring out the major one we're actually interested in, which is one of those verses that talks about this issue of unbelief. Okay. Now, if you notice, the parable talks about the man, the sower who sowed on 4 different grounds. Okay. And then there was one of those grounds where it says that when the word was sown, some people, it says they actually heard the word, but because they didn't understand the word, the devil came and took that which was sown. I think we might just probably read it, so if we can get an insight. You can read from verse 3.
14.
You can read from verse 3, yeah.
3?
Yeah. Mark 4 from verse 3.
Hearken, behold, there went out a sower to sow, and it came to pass, the sow, some fell by the wayside, and the fowls of the air came and devoured it up. And some fell on stony ground, where it had not much earth, and immediately it sprang up, because it had no depth of earth. But when the sun was up, it was scorched, and because it had no root, it withered away. Okay. And some fell amongst thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it, and it yielded no fruit. Another fell on good ground, and did yield fruit, that sprang up and increased, and brought forth some 30, some 60, and some 100. And he said unto them, he that hath ears to hear, let him hear. And when he was alone, they that were about him with the 12 asked of him the parable. And he said unto them, unto you it is given to know the mystery of the kingdom of God. But unto them that are without, all these things are done in parable, that seeing they may see and not perceive, and hearing they may hear and not understand.
Okay.
Lest at any time they should be converted. And
get to verse 14. Straight on.
Verse 14.
Now look at verse 13, please. Now, you listen to verse 13. This verse 13 is quite very interesting. It says, well, look at verse 13.
And he said unto them, know ye not this parable?
Okay.
And how then will ye know all parables?
Oh, Jesus said, this parable is the parable of parables. If that's the word. It says, if you don't understand this parable, you would not understand any other parable. This is the parable that unlocks other parables. Now you want to listen to what this parable has to give us an insight into how to drive this unbelief out of our lives. This is the parable of parables. Now watch now verse 14.
The sower soweth the word.
That's the word. So he's saying the seed is the word. This is very clear. Now, okay, go on please.
And these are they by the wayside,
Okay.
where the word is sown.
Okay.
But when they have heard,
Yeah.
Satan cometh immediately and taketh away the word that was sown in their hearts.
Okay.
Verse 16. And these are they likewise which are sown on stony
Now,
ground.
if you because of time, if we read the references in Matthew of this same particular story, he told them that by the wayside were those that heard the word, and because they did not understand the word that they heard, and the enemy came and actually what? Took the seed away. So it means every time we hear the word and don't understand what they're hearing, it gives ground for demonic activity in their lives. So the enemy comes, Satan comes to take that which was sown because they didn't understand what they heard. So, but that's not what we're interested in, because we're going to look at the ones that the word actually went into their lives. We're going to look at that. So, now go on, please.
Verse 16. And these are they likewise which are sown on stony ground,
Okay.
who when they have heard the word, immediately receive it with gladness. Verse
Okay.
17. And have no root in themselves, and so endure but for a time. Afterward, when affliction or persecution ariseth for the word's sake, immediately they are offended.
Okay, now it means that the first two categories are those who didn't understand. That was the first category, which means the word has never sunk down into their spirit. So the enemy came to take it away. And the next category were those that they heard it, but the word didn't take root in them. So you can see there are different situations. Now when I look at the third situation, which is where we are going to for insights on how to drive this unbelief out of our lives.
Verse 18.
That's it.
And these are they which are sown among thorns,
Okay.
such as hear the word.
Such as heard the word. Now this is why this third category are from the first two categories. Now the reason we've gone through the previous category so that we can compare and contrast. The first two categories, even the word didn't even have time to take root anyway. The first one, they didn't even understand what they heard. So which I always think people say most Christians might not probably even fall into. So there are some Christians in that category. And in fact, if you've been on our previous episode, please go and check out our transmission that we titled Unbelief Type 1. They are the people who have not even heard the word. They didn't even understand what the word is saying. And because of that ignorance, it's enough ground for them not to walk in the benefits of the cross. Ignorance. Now, this is the people in the first one. They didn't understand what we are talking about. So, but like we said, we are trying to focus on unbelief type 2. That's the unbelief that sits with belief in our lives. So that's why. And the second one, the second category, are those people that they actually heard the word, but there was no time for the word to go deep down into them. So again, that's the problem there. But this third category, which is the one that you might want to be interested in, they are the ones that actually what? Heard the word. I mean, they heard the word. That wasn't the problem. They heard what was being said. Now look at this.
Verse 19.
Verse 19.
And the case of this word.
Now be counting now. And now it's going to tell us that even they heard the word has been sown in them. Now the case of this word, go on.
And the deceitfulness of riches.
Okay.
And the lust of other things entering in.
Okay.
Choke the
now
word.
wait. It means the word was there. It means the word was in them already.
Yes, they said they had it.
So it's choke the word. You don't choke what is not there. You don't choke empty space. It means these people are different from the first two categories, because the first two categories, even the word didn't even have time to go in anyway, and they didn't even understand what was being said, or they didn't even take root. But this ones, the word was there.
It took root.
It took root. That's why you don't choke. I mean, for example, think about it. The word wasn't there going deep down. There's nothing for the tongues to choke. They had to choke something that was obvious there. So the Bible says these ones heard the word. I mean, and then we know, according to Romans chapter 10, verse 17. Now let's slow down here. It says that faith comes by what? Hearing, and hearing by the word. So it's talking about these people who heard the word. These people have faith. And you might want to say they do have faith, but it says even though they have faith, there was something that grew alongside the faith. This is what we've been talking about in the past transmissions about this unbelief type 2 that grows simultaneously with faith in our lives. So it means as the word was being sown in them, they heard the word, they believe what God said, they believe in the power of prayer, they believe in the potency and the efficacy of prayer. But as the word that they heard was growing in them in faith, simultaneously something grew alongside the faith that they've actually received by the word. Now that's why we're interested in this third category, which is where we said the majority of Christians are in terms of our spiritual life, our prayer life. Now you might want to listen to what Christ does suggest in this particular parable. Now go on please.
And the lust of other things entering in, choke
Now,
the word.
those things entering, does that not sound to be in the same way as what Apostle James was trying to say about the fact of what? Conception. James says it's not a problem with what is there. It's not a problem with those things. It's the fact that those things are what? They're actually encroaching and the conception is taking place. So he says, look at what? Encroaching what? In.
Yes.
Can you see what is in it?
Entering in, choke the word. And it becomes unfruitful.
It means there is a type of unbelief that can nullify faith. And that's why Jesus told the disciples, the reason why you couldn't cast out the devil is not because you've not heard the word. I gave you the power. I gave you the word. I told you to go and heal the sick and raise the dead. You had the power. That's not why you couldn't cast out the devil out of the body. It's because something grew alongside the word. Something was growing simultaneously and that thing choked the faith, and that thing limited the faith, and that thing made the faith of no effect. That's why you are so powerless and useless when it comes to casting the devil out of that boy. So here is Christ simply saying there's something can go simultaneously. Now, he tells us, he gives us an insight in what those things are, and those are the things we're going to place an handle on now. He classifies them into 3 categories. Now, again, he calls one of them, he says, the first one is the cares of this world. Have you noticed? We read 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7, that says, it says, cast your cares upon the Lord. It means, how are you responding to your natural circumstances? How are you responding to your what? Situation. Watch it. He said, the way you respond to your natural circumstances, the way your senses processes your situation, that thing has the capacity to encroach in. Now, you see the word encroaching in is very important now. It is not the circumstances that's the problem. Jesus said, he said, encroaching in. If there was no encroaching what? In, there would have been no conception according to Apostle James, and then the thing would have been aborted right there. It is not those things, it's the encroaching in of those things that Jesus Christ said comes to stifle the faith in us. So here we have those 3 things, the cares of this world. So the question we are simply asking is, when you come to the place of prayer, when you come to the place of exercising the faith of Christ in the place of prayer, did anything encroaching, the concerns, the cares of this world, how do you see them? How do you feel them? Or how do you listen to them? It says if the way you listen to them determines if they're encroaching or they are just merely cares of this world. So the cares of this world is not the problem, it's the encroaching in that is the problem. And that's what we can see.
The cares of this world, the deceitfulness.
Now, I'll talk about this. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because we're going to go there.
Okay,
so, like the cares of this world, talk about the concerns of this world. It says, watch it. We know what that is. And Jesus told us what those concerns are. If you notice in Matthew, he said, do not worry, because that's the same thing as concern or cares about what you eat, drink. And he said, all those things, they are there. They are things, they are natural situations. As long as we are humans and we are still in this flesh, there will be times we would have to think about what will I eat tomorrow, what will I drink, or how do we secure this in the future. I mean, there's nothing wrong with those things. People preach about the fact that even if you ever consider the cares of this world, it means that you are doing something wrong. Well, that wouldn't be true, because Jesus didn't say the cares of this world was the problem. He said encroaching in. Here comes the problem, the conception, according to what James said. Encroaching in is the issue. I mean, they can be there, you can look at them, but if there is no impregnation of the seed with the egg, there will be no conception. You can look at them as just merely cares of this world. That's what they are. And it's how you see them. Be careful what you hear, how you hear them. That's where the issue is. So we have the case of this world, which is just broken into 3 sections: what you want to eat, what to drink, and what to wear. Then again, it goes on to the deceitfulness of what? Riches. Now, that's also very important, because, of course, we have said in our previous episode, when we say deceitfulness of riches, people always think about, it's talking about rich people. Well, deceitfulness of riches can affect any class of people, whether you're rich or poor. And what does it say? It says a deception. It says riches lie to us. They lie to you and tell you about the fact that if you don't have me, it means you are poor. I mean, it gives you an identity. And for example, we read in James chapter 1, in previous, that it says, a brother of low degree should rejoice in that is exalted. How can you be of low degree and rejoice when exalted? It means he must have been rejoicing in a status that was imputed to him that has nothing to do with what he can come up with in this world. And that status is imputed on you and I by Jesus Christ. The Bible says we are seated, can you see, in the heavenly places with what? With Christ Jesus, far above principalities and what? And powers. There's a status that Christ gave to you. And he said you can rejoice in that what? Status. Don't let riches lie to you. Don't let riches lie to you and tell you that you don't have me, you are nothing. Or you don't have me, you are a nobody. Or you have me, then you are the highest person. I mean, all this riches lie to us. Riches are not our identity. Now that applies, like I said, to both the rich and what? The poor. It means as long as riches can confer an identity on you, whether you're rich or poor, he said that particular mentality has the capacity to encroach in. Again, we say it's not about the riches, it's not about the concept, it's about do they encroach into our mentality. He says once they come in, they will create a conception. There will be a conception now. And that conception is still completely what? Unbelief. Unbelief is the conception. We said it in James chapter 1. So here we are simply saying, the Bible says when we have such a mentality of being lied to by riches, it says it has the capacity to encroach in and then create unbelief. Now you see, Jesus didn't talk about unbelief as a word here, but he says that thing comes in and chokes what? The word. We've established by so many scriptures that thing that has the capacity to choke faith, and we say it's unbelief. So we know it's unbelief in this place. And the third one, he talks about what? Lots of other things. He says as whatever those things are, he said those desires of other things. It doesn't mean he's not saying we shouldn't have desires. What he's simply saying, like I said, all these things are legitimate. They are things that we encounter in our world. There's nothing we can do about it. We can't pray them what? Away. But James 1 tells us we can stop any conception from taking place. And the conception is unbelief. Because it said that's it. It's unbelief. It said we can stop the conception. And that's what Christ is simply saying here.
And it is interesting to know that riches that we were able to clarify that the deceitfulness of riches can affect is like a double-pronged, double-fang thing that can affect the riches and the poor. So deceiving both classes.
That's it.
So it's not that deceitfulness of riches to the poor, deceitfulness of riches to the rich.
That's why Jesus didn't put any class on it.
Right. So it can deceive and let the rich one, the wealthy ones, feeling the confidence and getting the security from the wealth, and so begin to acquire more and feel important because of what he acquire, and it can deceive the other one on the lower end of the class of the ladder, lower rung of the ladder, thinking that he needs to get this, even though he's not in that stage ready to become somebody. So that gives him a false identity. He begins to maybe fight against, because it's not already secure. So we see this covering. So we see the loss of other things is just a blanket covering anything you can think of.
As long as those things are the very things that drag us to unbelief. I mean, what you perceive, what you feel or see or hear, as long as, like we said, there are things that prevent us from laying hold upon what God has for us. And you see, there's something that you did talk about. I think our viewers might be interested in this. Let's look at 1 Timothy 6. And I think we need to quickly clarify that. Yeah. Now, why does it say deceitfulness of riches? Again, like we've often said, the problem is not the fact of being rich or being poor. It's the fact that they said something can encroach in. That's the word. Now, 6. You can read it from verse
verse 17.
Yeah, from verse 17. Yeah. Okay. Now watch this. 1 Corinthians 6 verse 17. What does it say then?
It reads, check them that are rich in this world,
okay,
that they be not high-minded,
okay,
not trusting on certain riches.
That's the word. Now he simply says that Paul was telling Timothy, he said, you try them that are rich in this world. He didn't say to stop being rich or not to get more money. But he's trying to say, for those that are rich in this world, let money be money to them. Let not money speak some other things into their senses. That's all he's saying. So if it's so for them, if they make more money, they make more money. If there's less money, there's less money. Money is money. But if money begins to speak, and people say money speaks, that's the problem. It's the speaking of money that he's talking about. Now that's why he said deceitfulness of what? He's deceiving. He's talking. And what he's saying is a lie. And he says, so Paul is trying to tell Timothy, tell those who are rich in this world, don't let money speak. That's what he's trying to say. He says that they be not what? Well, how did they get that minded? Something is telling them. Somebody is speaking to them. He said, no, don't let money speak. It's deceitfulness of riches. Now he said, don't let money speak. Not trusting what? See, don't let it confer a level of confidence. Now the question you're asking, why is Paul saying you shouldn't confer a level of confidence? What is it driving at? Now watch what it's driving at. Watch. Now what's the next thing?
Not trusting on certain riches, but in the living God.
That's the problem. In the living God who gives a lot of things, he said there's something that can encroach into the hearts of people that they are not able to lay hold upon what God has to offer. He said, tell them not to trust in what? He didn't stop that. It is not telling them not to trust for not trusting's sake. He said this is the reason. If they actually trust certain riches, if those things encroach in, deceitfulness of riches, if it encroaches in, they will lose the capacity to lay hold upon the trust God, the living God who gives us, they will miss the real deal. That's what it's saying. They will miss the real deal. So it means if somebody can be rich in terms of financial, capacity or resources, and yet the person knows there's a real deal. Paul said, well, this is not addressed to them. It's not for that kind of rich person I'm talking. This particular verse 17 doesn't apply to such a rich person. That's what I'm talking about. So this verse doesn't really apply to everyone. It only applies to those who think, something encroaching in now, they've lost the desire or the drive to lay hold upon the real deal. He said, for the living God who gives us what? All things richly to what? Enjoy. So this is what is actually attacking, and that's the very thing. So there's something that comes into the mind of somebody that encroaches in, whether rich or poor, that can actually make the person lose, the desire or the drive to lay hold upon the very great deal that God has to offer.
Yes, it is very comforting to read this chapter 6, verse 17, that charge them that are rich in this world that he did not say that they should not be rich anymore.
No.
Go and sell, like he said, and just come and everything. It's very comforting. And I'm responding like the way Peter responded to Jesus when he told them about it was going to be hard for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God. It's good, like just going through the eye of the camel, going through the eye of the needle. And he responded and said, what about us? How do we? It's very comforting for people in any class to see that they say that we just know where to place the trust. And so the money will not speaking in them. So if the money is speaking in them, they become high-minded. They have their focus and their trust in that uncertain riches, taking their trust away from the Father who gives liberally. So you begin to have the confidence in their account and their acquisition. And so they feel like they can get all those things. They don't even understand that the Father the source anymore. So they allow this thing to rule them. They allow this thing to talk out of them. That's why high-mindedness is the money speaking in them. So that is the thing. And so they are missing out of the real deal.
There's one thing that actually comes out in this particular verse. It's just like a taste test. If people are advertising and they put you can put a particular drink, and then you tell people, you can taste and see which drink is better. I mean, you see, the Apostle Paul is doing something here by the Holy Ghost. He's trying to tell the rich people, there's a greater deal. It's a God who gives. I mean, you think you have something. There's somebody that can actually give you in such a way it will blow your mind from the very thing you think you have available at the moment in your hand. You've not seen real giving. That's what he's saying. You've not actually seen real possession. So the Apostle Paul is reintroducing the fact that, well, you don't want to lose the capacity to lay hold on what God has to offer you. And don't allow anything to encroach in, to choke your faith in what God has to offer. And that's what he's saying. And again, if you notice, if you go to Matthew 6 and where Jesus was teaching about not worrying, in Matthew 7 and all those places, about you not worrying, anxiety. You see, like again, we said this affects all classes of what? Of people. For some people, to them, they think, well, you know what, I'm poor because I don't have money. And I think nothing else matters. I'm not significant before the presence of God. I'm not even significant before men because I don't have this thing. That's a lie again, coming from riches. Can you see that? That's a lie coming from riches. So it can lie to any class of what? Of people. As long as we take our identity from whether we have or we don't have, it says that very thing, if it encroaches into our what? Mentality, if our senses take them in, the Bible says in this Mark that we read in Mark chapter 4, that those things can go in and they will choke they can choke faith. So it means, how then do we stop them in their tracks? What does that give us? Now let's go back. You want to say?
Yes, I want to just read verse 18 that said, verse 18 was said that they do good and that they were rich in good works, ready to distribute, willing to communicate. Verse 19, laying up in store for themselves a good foundation against the time to come, that they may hold on eternal life. So it's telling us that if they really have the trust on God and not on the money, they will be willing to give up, to do good, to distribute. But if they have the trust on what they have, that is the source, so they really want to hold on and feel like they are building on what they have. But if they have the trust placed in the Father who gives liberally, so they know that it came from the Father, so they can open their hands and hearts to people, they can do good, they can communicate, willing to distribute, because they know God is the source. But it shows where the trust is, and the symptoms, the signs showing if you actually have the trust in the money or trust in the Father. And so that's why he's telling them they should not take their eyes of the Father, that they should need to trust the Father so that they can show, and that by trusting the Father, they can show by their good works, communicating, willing to distribute, that is ready to release at the point, because they know it comes from the Father, and the Father is able to give liberally. You know, it gives them richly to enjoy. Then thank you for bringing that Matthew chapter 6. That most of the time they actually thought that Matthew chapter 6, others that one, do not care, do not worry. They thought it's only for those people in the lower class. The poor, again, that's the verse for them. They feel like it affects all sphere, all strata, all classes. Even for the rich, that verse is talking to them about, so that they know even the care in the midst of all their possession and acquisition. They don't allow the cares to choke. I mean, to incubate them. You know, the Luke was talking about we should not be incubated with this. Now the day comes unawares. You know, that we don't allow the care. So it's still watching out for these things, cares, and it affects all humanity, all Homo sapiens. That we don't allow this thing to come into us, and we do this by training our body,
train our senses.
We train our senses.
Bringing us subjection.
So we work on our hearts. How do we work on our hearts? That it will repel all these things. That it's not going to stay. It's not going to stick on you. You know, as it comes, as you're on this side of eternity, you see all these things is in the atmosphere, and people are going to talk. You can't run away from people from saying what they say. You can't run away. You even need to look at the TV for information. So you can't even run away. Some can be able to cut off. Some cannot do that. But you're going to work on yourself. What you can do is to work on yourself to repel. So you can work on your heart to repel this and say it will not stay. It will not stick on me. All this thing, unbelief will not stick on me, whichever way is coming. So, you know, you have worked your body to the extent that in the way it's coming, because sometimes it might not even be through the popular means. It might even be in some place of worship, is unbelief coming. So it might be some people you regard like as friends, as spiritual counselors and everything. You find those things. You get it from there. They are your friends. And people, you even believe in them, in their authority. So, but your body is not even going to differentiate because you have worked it up. You have worked it in faith, in place of prayer and in fasting. And so it's repelling wherever it's coming, whichever direction, whichever form, is the one picking it up and throwing it back. So it's bouncing back. And that's what we're calling you up to. And that's what we're opening your eyes to see with this episode, to see the way of escape. We're still talking about the way of escape and what fasting needs to do for you. And how you can employ the instrument of fasting and promening your body, bringing into retraining your body, working on your heart. You can control that. You may not be able to control the society, but you can control this and stop the conception and say you will not go into fruition inside of me, because we don't want it to make that work of God fruitless. Like when the tongues came, he said they become unfruitful. That's it. So you don't want something to choke in.
Unbelief. So if unbelief is so efficacious that it just nullifies all of faith. Now you see, there's an insight that we've been given, this 1 Timothy 6.
Okay.
And it's a very deep insight. If you notice in verse 18 that you just read, it said that they do good, that they be rich in good works, ready to distribute. Now, that would really look like they should learn to train. They're trying to train themselves. If you notice, that verse 18 is a training process. It said, let them train themselves and tell money that, you see, you don't determine who I am. You're not in charge of my life. You're not in charge of my mentality. You don't dictate to me. He said these people should take conscious steps to train. Can you see that? That's what verse...
prove, to show that they don't trust. You cannot just say, I don't trust in money. God is my trust. How do we know that you don't trust? That you show by your good works.
This is where fasting comes in. You see, this is where fasting, that's why we said before that we cannot categorically just limit fasting to food. Fasting means you can tell everything around your life and say, you know what, I can determine when to engage you and I can disengage you at will. That is actually the psychology that fasting drives into our life, even the fasting for food. The fasting for food simply you say, you know what, you tell food, I determine when I eat and I determine when I don't eat. My body, my senses don't just drive me around and dictate when I eat. Now this can be transferred, as we can see, into every aspect of life, into the very thing that Jesus mentioned in that Mark chapter 4. All those things are to be engaged by the weapon of the tool of fasting. Because in this case, he's telling the rich man in verse 18, this is your own type of fasting, if you want to put it in that context. They can say, you know what, ready to distribute, ready to say, well, I can do without you. I can decide when to take you on. I mean, I can decide when to release you. I mean, you're not my identity. You don't determine who I am. So he's trying to say they should train themselves. That's it. So that why? If you look at verse 19, it says, laying up in store for themselves a good foundation against the time to come, that they may lay hold on eternal life. So it says, well, it said they'll be able to lay hold on it. Even whether they have money, or they have millions or billions, or they have nothing, they've gotten to a point where money doesn't dictate to them. They dictate to what? Money. You have to dictate to money before you can be willing to distribute with it. So the point is the training. That's it. In a way, if you please, you can say verse 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 18 is the fasting. For those that have, I mean, they can say, well, I mean, I determine when it goes and when it comes. I determine. It doesn't tell me anything. I tell him something. And that's what is driving. So we have to see fasting in this context. It's a bigger picture. Fasting is not just limited to food. It's a bigger picture. And of course, as we've said, Jesus said that's one of the tools that can be used to drive out unbelief.
On this note, we are just going to draw the curtain, and I just want to reiterate this fact that this you can see fasting in 1 Timothy 6 in a different context for somebody else. So you are going to find out what is fasting for you, for your own destiny, because what I need to fast from might be different from what you need to fast from. We can see what the rich people in 1 Timothy chapter 6 were to fast from. So we know what in whichever class you see the word of God is applicable to all people in all very rank. The rung of the ladder, all social classes and all tribes, that we know that we need to train ourselves, working on ourselves. We're using the instruments of the prayer and fasting, and to know what. And this fasting is so broad that it's beyond food. It's beyond things you need to know about. Things that you can work on greed and self-acquisition. There's so many things to fast from. You are going to find this out. You are going to look into yourself and look at it and find out individually what is that thing that you need to train your body, to deny your body off from. So you really need to work yourself. I hope that you've seen light in what we have discussed today. And so we hope that you will join us the same time, Sunday, 9 a.m. UK time, so that we continue on this subject of prayer. So as we thought we were having a closure on this, we just find this just spreading the tentacles, and we are just following. We are just going to be following the leading of the Lord as He leads us into those verses. And we do hope that you are blessed with this episode. If this speaks to you, please, we want you to live the truth. We want to see the fruit, because that is what gives us joy. Just like John said, that it is my joy when I see my children walking in truth. So we do hope that you walk in the truth of this word. And so we see you Sunday 9 a.m. UK time. So bye.
Bye.
Go and fast and pray.
Amen.